tomorrow night we've got some great stuff going on, and Rosemary Jackson's Cosmic Consciousness for the 21st Century is on, and we'd like you to see that. It's at 7 o'clock. And now I'd like you to meet this wonderful friend of mine. This is John Twobirds. John, thank you so much for coming this evening.
My
Just
pleasure.
a pleasure to see you. We've been old friends for many years.
Yes. I'm
Yes.
glad to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me come down.
We met in Sedona many, many years ago, and we had some wonderful stories, and a lot of people that laughed at these stories, and they said, oh, these never happened, but we're going to show them tonight, aren't we, John?
Well, it depends, I guess.
Nice, yeah. And we had some interesting stories. One of the stories, I'll just go right into it, is about Billy Meyer.
Yes. You have to understand, at the time when we lived in Sedona, they had a restaurant there that was kind of the meeting place for everybody, and it was, I used to laughingly say it's where we went and held court every day. And it was a really interesting place because in this particular restaurant you would have people over here talking about ETs, and somebody over here talking about Reiki, and somebody over here talking about Shiatsu, and you had myself talking about Native American stuff and things. And so it was kind of where everybody went down to see everybody else. And one day when I was in there, I was sitting there, and it was also a good place to get your breakfast bought for you, you know. And so I was in the place and was talking to various people and things, and I noticed this gentleman came in the door, and because I've spent time in Europe and so on, by the cut of his clothes and things, I just said to myself, oh, another foreign guest, and really didn't pay much attention to him right then, but he took a seat over against the wall, and he kept watching me. And later on, after everybody left and I was getting ready to go, he came over and introduced himself and asked me if I was John Twobirds, and I said yes, I was. And he said, well, he had some friends that would like to meet me. And I said, yeah, that would be fine, because that was not unusual at the time to have foreign visitors or just people in general who came into town to come and talk to me and things. And he said, well, they're out in one of the canyons, and at the time there was a lot of people that camped out in the canyons and stuff, and so that was nothing unusual either. And then he asked me if I had a car, and I said, yeah, I have a car. And he said, well, could you give me a ride out there? And I said, yeah, sure. And again, it was nothing unusual. And so I gave him a ride out to one of the canyons outside of Sedona. And this one particular canyon, he said, well, they're about 300 meters up the canyon. And I happened to have hiked that particular canyon and knew that there was a fairly large clearing about 300 meters up the canyon. And I thought, yeah, that's a really good place to camp. And so as we was walking through the woods up towards this clearing, and I saw these three people standing there, a man, a very tall man, and two women. And they were dressed in what I would call probably a work suit or a pantsuit kind of thing. Again, nothing unusual. The man was silver-haired and very craggy faced, but someone you knew who was used to being in command, someone of authority. And the women were young, very nice-looking women, and that, of course, always interests me. And as we got to them, they greeted me, and the first thing that I noticed about them is when they greeted me, their mouth was not moving, but I was hearing them in my head. And so I greeted them back, and that kind of surprised them. And they informed me that I was much more advanced than they thought that I would be. And we began to communicate with each other. They began to tell me some things about themselves and told me that they had been watching me for some period of time, about 25 years, and that it was time for us to meet. And during the process of this, I need to mention here that I'm not a really big fan of extraterrestrials, if you will. And I made that fairly obvious to them, that this was not something that I really wanted to get into, and I was very uncomfortable with, and I would really like to leave. And they said, well, we have some things that we would like to impart to you. And we talked about those things. And then later on, I agreed to meet with them again a second time. And just for some reason, I said, I would really like some kind of evidence, some kind of proof that this meeting took place. And so the gentleman in charge, who called himself Pata, turned to Mr. Meyer and he said, give him something. And he pulled out this leather wallet, and in this wallet he had a whole bunch of pictures. And he just put them out, and he said, choose some of these. And then he said, take 5. And so I was looking through these pictures, and I'd never heard of this gentleman before. It wasn't until much later after that, after I had the pictures and I went back home and showed the pictures to some people, and they said, oh yes, Billy Meyer has been working with the Plejadians, the Dalians, and the Dernians, for some period of time now. And so I just picked these pictures at random, and for me they were more like just some kind of evidence for myself to say that see, here I did get these things and stuff. And then later on people began to explain what the pictures meant and things to me. And it was really interesting what happened after that, because there was several people in the community who got really, really upset with me because they felt like I didn't show enough deference to these individuals. And as I mentioned, I'm not a really big fan of ETs in any form. My experience with them and my knowledge about them and what I was taught about them haven't been really good. So that was pretty much that story. What happened later, though, was there was a big fuss about it, and some of Billy's people out in California got a hold of me, and they had written Billy, and Billy had swore that he's never met me. And I said, well, that's all right, I got these pictures. So I did go out to California and meet with them. They did look at the pictures, they did authenticate them, that those were pictures that Billy does have made, and that he does give out, and so on. Things kind of calmed down, though, whenever I told him, look, I'm not interested in trying to make any money off Billy Meyer, or I'm not even interested in Billy Meyer for that matter. And that seemed to kind of calm things down. Apparently at the time there was a great deal of controversy, about people trying to cash in on Mr. Meyer's extraterrestrial experiences and so on. And that wasn't the case with me at all. I have since lost communication with those people, and it's just an interesting story to me.
I also understand they gave you some papers.
Yes. Mr. Meyer also gave me a copy of his original manuscript of the Jemanuel papers. And these were also authenticated by his people out in California. One of the ladies out there, as a matter of fact, was doing the translation out of German into English. And this happens to be a particular style, some of the ways that Billy types, I guess, and things. And when she looked at him, she said, yes, those are definitely copies of the original papers that Billy's been using and stuff. So those were the two things that I had asked for, and the two things that I got. And little did I know that I had something that a lot of people got very upset about me having, because, again, I'm, as they look at, a negative ET person, if you will. And I've actually had people say to me, why didn't they pick me? I would do anything to get to talk to one of them, or whatever. And I wasn't really interested in talking to them at all, and I'm still not very interested in them. But one of the things that it did do for myself, though, it did allow me to confirm in my own mind that, yes, extraterrestrials do in fact exist. They are in fact out there, and I had known this all along, but it was another form of evidence, if you will, on my part, and I had actually never really been able to converse or be close to one in the manner that I was that time and the second time, and consequently I've had 2 other meetings with them since then. And so that's the extent of my my Billy Maher story and things, but it created a great deal of controversy at the time, didn't it?
Yeah, it sure did. And I remember when you wasn't it right after you had seen us when I met you?
Yeah.
It was right after
Yeah,
that.
well, you, as a matter of fact, you were sponsoring a UFO conference up there
Yeah,
at
it
the time.
was at the time. And then
Yeah.
you handed me your papers.
Yeah.
You said, "Here, I think you can use these."
Yeah, and I kind of asked Helga, I said, are these real, you know? And I said, who's Billy Maher? And Helga was the first one who really said, oh, Billy Maher, you know? And I'm going, yeah, who's Billy Maher, you know? I said, this one-armed guy came over, and I went through this whole thing with these extraterrestrials, you know, these ETs, and this Artura, and this other lady, and everybody was going, here in Sedona? And I'm going, yeah, right up in the canyon out there, you know. And so it was really, really kind of interesting, and things kind of, as my gramps would say, there was a big foofara over it after that.
Yeah, yeah. I was in a state of shock for a long time, but I treasured these, and all these years I kept these in very good order.
Good.
Yeah.